I just love this red dot. I love being able to stand on this. So yeah, I'm Desi. I'm from the Field Innovation Team. I am the Chief Wrangler, and today I'm really going to focus on talking about education empowerment in disasters and what we do in disaster deployments around the world, but also how educators help us to empower and enlighten survivors. So with that, I'm going to give a quick introduction to FIT and who I am. Jen and Barbara asked that I talk about my background and how I got into emergency management. So I'm going to give you a quick story. I was a law student at Northern Illinois University many years ago when a school shooting happened. There was an active shooter on campus. Unfortunately, there were fatalities, and it was a very extreme time to be on a university campus and have that happen. It really changed my outlook. I was very involved in human rights, doing a lot of work on the west coast of Africa, and suddenly here I am in my own emergency. I don't know what to do. So after that happened, I started getting into emergency management. I joined the Urban Area Security Initiative. I worked at city, at local, and then at federal levels. As Barbara mentioned, I was at FEMA. But emergencies are near and dear to my heart, and as you know, as educators, we got to keep our kids safe and our students safe, but we also have to empower them to know what to do in a response and a recovery effort. So back to the Field Innovation Team, our mission is to empower humans to create cutting-edge disaster solutions. We started very organically. After I got my job at Homeland Security, I had a little team that developed after some floods hit my hometown, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And we thought that the citizens of the city, as well as the public infrastructure, needed more resources. So we actually wrote a letter to the president. It was with the city of Milwaukee. We were all connected on this. And we then brought that up, and he signed off, and Milwaukee got a declaration for about $50 million for public infrastructure, but also for these citizens who really needed some resources after this big flood in 2010. So after FIT got established, it was still very organic for about 4 years. We spent time in the National Response and Coordination Center during the tornadoes that hit Moore, Oklahoma. We were out in the field in Hurricane Sandy, as was mentioned. We did a whole lot of different things all around the United States and then eventually around the world in 4 years, but completely volunteer. About 2014, we finally decided to become a nonprofit, and so now we still go out into disasters, but we've got some resources to help our volunteers do the incredible work that they do.
From the National Weather Service, a vigorous frontal system will bring significant snowfall tonight through Wednesday night. Winter storm warning in effect from 4 a.m. Wednesday to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time Thursday.
So yeah, we do things all around the world. And I have to keep myself in check today because there's so many disasters we're involved in right now, including the Syrian refugee crisis, the floods in Pakistan, the work in Nepal, but I only have time for 2 stories. So I'm going to try and keep it to that. And a few people backstage asked if I could sneak in some stuff about the drone flights, and how a young student helped us come up with the solution. I'm going to try and get to that, but we'll see where I get. So the first one I'm going to start with is the U.S.-Mexico border crisis. This has been going on a lot longer than 2014 to 2015, as you know, but this is when we actually deployed. To give you a couple of statistics, since 2011, there's been over 147,000 people who've crossed the U.S.-Mexico border. Approximately 50% of those folks are young men, young boys, from the ages of 13 to 17, and another 25% of that is 12 and under. Many of these people, these young boys, are unaccompanied, so this is a really big challenge. And it's impacting a lot of states. It's impacting Philadelphia, it's impacting, obviously, Texas, California, Washington State. There's a lot of places that are having an influx of young children without parents. So we were given the task of working with the children in San Antonio. There were hundreds that had come. This was actually in 2014 to begin. We had 2 deployments. And in this first deployment, we really focused on the kids, and we helped build curriculum with the staff and the educators in San Antonio to help them get some great education and some exponential learning tools. This first deployment, you'll see the picture is of these young kids. They're assembling solar-powered robots, little kits that we had for them, and we're teaching them a lot of STEAM. So we used a lot of art with technology. You can see that there's a couple young men who are building out little robotics, but they're also drawing them out, and they're coming up with their own ideas. And we're trying to cross the different sectors to help build learning in a lot of different departments. The other neat thing is many of our roboticists happen to be female. So we have an influx of young, unaccompanied boys, and most of them in the ages of 13 to 17. And now you have these women, these roboticist women, teaching these young boys about the technology. And it wasn't just boys, but that was pretty interesting to see that dynamic. And I'm sure that isn't something that they've seen in their home countries. Another thing to note is a lot of the young men and women who we were teaching were Latin American descent. So we're talking Guatemalan, Honduran, and El Salvadorian. So you can imagine that that was a huge trip from Latin America through Mexico into the United States. And I love this photo. It's going to be hard for you maybe to see, but there's pictures and drawings of robotics. So we did have a smaller group of young girls that we were teaching different concepts to, and we brought this idea of a robotics petting zoo to the border crisis. We thought it would be very interesting to connect what we're doing with technology into a fun and creative and collaborative environment where they could tear apart the robots, they could play with them, they could interact. And so thus was born this robotics petting zoo. And in this photo in particular, these young ladies at lunchtime decided to draw their own robots. So they just started doing this, and they were talking about space, artificial intelligence, robots, things that, that were pretty sophisticated for just learning about some of these technologies. In this specific photo, closest to the young lady who's got her feet, little black shoes on, she's very proud of that photo. It's going to be hard for you to see, but it's a hand. And she called it the helping hand. And the story behind this is this helping hand was a robot used, or a robot that she created, that was used to help humans in crisis. So she's really thinking about empathy, which is pretty cool, and how technology ties into that. The second piece that she was telling us about was that each one of the fingers, the fingertips, took in external data. And so it would take the external data, as she explained it, and it would come into, there's a little red heart on the palm. It'd come into the palm, and through artificial intelligence, it would take the external data and it would extract the reason why it was going to go out and help the humans in crisis. What was the gap that it could fill? Now, this is pretty sophisticated for just having seen a robotics petting zoo and had us be there for 10 days, but that's the kind of impact that was driven during the border crisis. During our second deployment, though, we realized we impacted 100 kids, maybe I would say hundreds of kids, which is amazing. Impacting each kid and each student is amazing, as you know, as educators when you do that. But we also need to learn about sustainability and scale, and we had to bring in not just the teachers and the educators, but also the administrators to do this when we're not around. Because what had happened in the first deployment is we came in, we did this great work, we impacted hundreds of lives, fantastic, we got to go home. But then the curriculum didn't stay. There wasn't a robotics petting zoo. There wasn't improvisational workshops going on. There weren't art, technology, and science being put together. These were things, even storytelling and independently and creatively coming up with content that just stopped. It was like we left and it was done. So we realized that one mistake we had made in the design of our workshop was we needed to integrate the educators, the direct care staff, and the administrators to culturally create a different system and use this curriculum when we leave. And so we worked directly with all the staff. It was fantastic, and they were incredible to work with. Robotics petting zoo, I just told you about. I'm sure not many people have run a robotics petting zoo in a border crisis. If you have, raise your hand, and you can come join me on the stage. We took this then to Austin, Texas, and we thought, you know what, this is so cool, let's bring it to a wider audience. So we brought it to 30,000 people in Austin. And as you can see, there's kids playing and interacting with the robots in this photo. It was really interesting to see just the dynamic conversations and the parallel conversations between the kids that we were working with on the border and the kids that we were working with in Austin. Some of the same dialogues were happening. This is yet another photo. Ray, one of our wonderful inventors, he created a homemade robot. And I just wanted to put this slide on because it's very, as you can see, it's very detailed. And he did this in his garage. So it's pretty cool to see the work that people are doing. And although he's not youth, he actually worked a lot with youth to create the design. On from the US-Mexico border crisis into Nepal. So we've talked about kids and how they've come over the border, they're unaccompanied, and we're helping staff and the administration to build additional curriculum for these youth. In the Nepal earthquakes, we thought we would be doing a lot more reconstruction. So just to give you some history on what's going on and some stats, 2 earthquakes, big ones, hit Nepal. There were a lot of aftershocks beyond that, but there was a 7.8 that hit and a 7.3. They were in April and they were in May. We had come in thinking, wow, we're going to help build classrooms, we're going to help build infrastructure. What we found is, once again, just as education played an incredible role in the US-Mexico border crisis, it was also playing an incredibly important role in what we were about to do in Nepal. So when we embarked on this journey, we started with virtual training, because this time we learned. We knew that last time we came in and we helped a bunch of children, we did a lot of great work, but then there was no sustainability. So we immediately partnered with a community organization that helps to empower women. And at the start, at the get-go, we had our team Skyping, so being telepresent with the Nepali women and the staff and faculty in this organization so that they could get up to speed on some of the curriculum that we were going to bring and have them be the leads rather than us be the leads. This was an example of what we did. So we had a lot of curriculum that we built off of the US-Mexico border crisis that did get used and repurposed. However, we also looked for gaps in our organization, right? So we were thinking, what else can we do to help? And there were 2 things that we saw. One was this demographic of young women. There's a ton of young women in Nepal currently. It's elderly women and children. And you might wonder why, but a lot of the young men go overseas or they go to Abu Dhabi and Dubai to work, so they can provide support for their families. So during this earthquake, we have this gap. We have a lot of women, and they're capable, they're in their 20s, they're ready to go. And so we, again, worked with them virtually, but when we got on the ground, we had them facilitating the games. And some of the games were more public health related than what we did on the border crisis. And why we did this is because monsoon season was just around the corner for Nepal, so a lot of rain, and not just that, we also had an infrastructure issue, right? So if you're used to having a lot of public health issues during monsoon season, and then suddenly you have 2 large earthquakes and a lot of aftershocks, the infrastructure is going to be down. So we need to teach proper hygiene to kids. We need to get that out. So an epidemiologist who's now a professor at the University of Chicago joined us, and we developed these public health curriculum games, really fun, very active, to teach about hand washing, to teach different principles of how we keep ourselves in proper hygiene. And in this scene, what you're seeing is Tara, one of the Nepali women that came under our belt. She is actually playing a game. It's basically, it teaches hand washing, and you stand in the middle and you have a certain disease that you can get from tactile touch, like diarrhea. And people try to pass through the middle. And if they tag you, if she tags you, you become a part of Tara's circle. And what you see is this huge blend of people who now have an illness just based on tactile touch. So that was a great game. It taught a lot of lessons, right? The other thing to mention about the demographic of Nepal is we talked about this gap of men in this large area of this demographic of women that we empowered while we were there during and after the earthquakes. What was very interesting about what the gender report said, we didn't realize this till later, was of the 2 million plus households in the 11 most devastated districts of the Kathmandu Valley, there is over 284,000 female-led households. So there's a lot of women there that can be empowered to do work and to help with the relief efforts. This is a great photo of us in the classroom. So we did a lot of curriculum build, but the other thing to know, this is very rare because 50,000 classrooms were destroyed, according to USAID, after the earthquakes. So this is a great example of a classroom that was not destroyed, but we spent a lot of time also bringing students out into the field, and through engineering and architecture, they were building temporary learning centers while we were there. The other thing to note is the aftershock that hit, we were building this temporary learning center in the Gorkha district, and a 4.5 hit while we were building it. Everyone was safe, but just to say this is a very active world, and certainly the design went up, but it was a precarious time. And this photo is some of the kids that we worked with. Every day we worked with at least 200 or 300 children in these schools. What's great about this, though, is besides doing the public health gaming and teaching curriculum to young Nepali women who brought it into their communities, we also, built the temporary learning centers. In this scene, though, we actually have performing artists talking about human trafficking. So they're acrobatic, they're doing cool things, they're getting the attention of the kids, but they're also bringing awareness of the fact that human trafficking was a big issue. After the earthquakes, a lot of kids were trafficked over to India. And so one way to reach them is through fun, creative performing arts, teach them positive lessons, but also gain awareness about the fact that this is happening. And this is just yet another photo of us performing. We performed with Circus Kathmandu, which is a group of young men and women who actually were victims of trafficking. I should say survivors of trafficking, because they were taken over to India, placed into circuses to perform, and then subsequently released. And now they run a great organization that brings awareness. Upcoming disaster preparedness and what we're up to. So we have a lot going on, but one of the areas that we have been very involved in is youth preparedness in Canada. So if any of you are in Banff, Canada, and you want to come up to the mountains in a couple weeks, we'll be working with a lot of young youth with Royal Roads University and their Resilience by Design group. There's another great workshop on Hurricane Sandy and the commemoration. I'm realizing I'm coming over my time. So before I thank you, do I have 30 seconds for a drone story? Quick story, okay. So those are, if you want to learn more about that, please ask Jen and Barbara. I'm happy to give you information about what we're doing with youth and disasters. The drone story is we're around the table with the incident command. I'm virtual at this point. The team is looking at what we've created. We created a 3D scan after flying this drone 7 times over the topography of the mudslide. It's a big mudslide in Washington State. And the incident command is saying, well, this is great that you have the scan, but how are we going to see the conditions before in order to see where the rivers moved? Great that you gave us this 3D scan and this picture of what it looks like, but tell us how we're going to do that. And there's a kid next to us, a student, and also a son of one of our volunteers, and he's really frustrated. And he says, I don't know why you guys don't get this. All you got to do is 3D print the topography map, and after you 3D print it, we're going to project the old image of the topography on this 3D print. And he was so ticked off about the fact that we didn't think this through, right? So just to point out that this young man, I mean, he wasn't even 13 years old at the time, was able to give us a solution. We ended up doing that. We gave it to the incident command, and they used that to help with the rest of their recovery efforts. So I want to thank you for your time, and I want to remind you that you play a role in disasters for future survivors, but you also play a role with FIT. And we want to stay in touch with you because what you're doing in the classroom, we need to empower out in the disaster field. Thank you very much.